In the autumn of 1966, a state highway crew breaking ground for a new interstate outside Ashford, Kentucky, stumbled upon something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. 17 feet beneath the red clay soil, wrapped in rotted linen and arranged in a perfect circle, were the remains of 9 children. Their ages ranged from infancy to perhaps 12 years old. But it wasn't the discovery itself that shook the workers to their core. It was what the coroner found when he examined the bodies. Each child bore the same distinctive birthmark on their left shoulder blade, a crescent moon cradling 3 stars. And each child had died exactly 100 years apart. The oldest in 1766, the youngest in 1866. The state sealed the files within 72 hours. The workers were paid to forget. The coroner resigned and never spoke of it again. But someone remembered. Someone always remembers. And what they remembered led back to a family that should not exist, a bloodline that bought their future by sacrificing their past. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Winfield name appears in colonial records as early as 1723, when a man named Josiah Winfield purchased 200 acres of land in what would become Harlan County, Kentucky. He arrived with no wife, no children, no past. Town records describe him as a physician, though no one could recall where he'd studied medicine. He was welcomed nonetheless. Frontier communities didn't ask too many questions of men who could set bones and brew remedies from roots and bark. But Josiah Winfield had not come to heal. He had come to build something that would outlast death itself. By 1730, Winfield had married a local woman named Constance Merritt, the daughter of a Presbyterian minister. Within a year, she bore him a son, Samuel, then another son, Elias, then a daughter, Abigail. 4 more children followed in quick succession. The Winfield household swelled with life, with laughter, with the promise of legacy. Neighbors remarked on how blessed Josiah seemed, how his crops never failed, how his livestock never sickened, how he never aged a day past 40, even as his wife's face grew lined and her hands grew gnarled. Constance died in 1744. She was 38 years old. Her death certificate listed the cause as melancholia. But her sister would later write in a private letter that Constance had tried to leave Josiah 3 times, and each time, one of her children fell gravely ill. The last time, she packed a bag and made it as far as the property line before her youngest daughter collapsed in convulsions. Constance returned. The child recovered. Constance never tried to leave again. Josiah remarried within 6 months. His new wife, a widow named Prudence Hale, brought no children of her own. She gave Josiah 3 more before she, too, succumbed to melancholia in 1751. He remarried again. And again. Each wife bore him children. Each wife died young. And through it all, Josiah Winfield did not age, did not falter, did not slow. By 1760, he had fathered 19 children across 4 marriages, and that was when the first sacrifice was made. The infant was named Mercy. She was born in the winter of 1766 to Josiah's 4th wife, a woman named Eliza Thorne. The birth was difficult. Eliza hemorrhaged for 3 days before she finally passed, leaving the newborn in the care of Josiah's older children. Mercy lived for exactly 6 weeks. The town record states she died of fever, but there was no fever that winter. No epidemic. No sickness sweeping through the county. Just one infant, wrapped in linen, buried in the dead of night on Winfield land, far from the family plot where the wives were laid to rest. Josiah's eldest son, Samuel, was 26 years old when Mercy died. He had begun keeping a journal, fragments of which would surface nearly 2 centuries later in an estate sale outside Lexington. The entries are sporadic, written in a cramped, fevered hand. In one, dated March of 1767, Samuel writes, "Father has made a bargain I cannot comprehend. He speaks of time as though it were a river he has learned to dam. He says we are blessed, but I have seen what he buries beneath the old oak. I have seen the marks he carves into their skin before the earth takes them. This is not blessing. This is purchase." Samuel disappeared in 1768. No record of his death exists. No grave was ever marked. His name simply vanishes from all family documents after that year, as though he had been carefully erased. But his journal survived, hidden in a false bottom of a traveling trunk that passed through 6 generations before anyone thought to look inside. What Samuel had witnessed was the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself with mechanical precision for the next century. Every 100 years, a Winfield child would die in infancy or early childhood. Every 100 years, the family would bury that child far from prying eyes. And every 100 years, the surviving Winfields would continue to thrive in ways that defied natural law. They accumulated land, wealth, influence. Men who should have been dead from old age continued to walk the earth with the vigor of youth. Women who should have been barren bore children into their 50s. The Winfield bloodline did not weaken, it compounded. And the price for that strength was paid in the small, cold bodies of children who never saw their first birthday. By 1866, the family had grown into a sprawling dynasty. They owned coal mines, textile mills, logging operations across 3 states. They married into political families, banking families, railroad families. The Winfield name appeared on deeds and diplomas, on courthouse records and church registries. They had become untouchable. And in that year, another child died, a boy named Thomas, aged 9 months, cause of death, undetermined, buried at night, alone. The pattern should have continued, another century, another child, another silent burial beneath the Kentucky soil. But something went wrong in 1966. Or perhaps something went right, depending on how you measure the cost of breaking a curse that was never meant to be broken. The highway crew that discovered the bodies was led by a foreman named Dale Hutchins, a Korean War veteran who had seen enough death to recognize when something was profoundly unnatural. He was the one who noticed the birthmarks first, before the coroner arrived. He was the one who saw that the children had been arranged in a specific pattern, their heads pointing toward a center point where the soil was darker, richer, as though something had been feeding there for generations. And he was the one who made the call to the state police instead of the local sheriff, a decision that likely saved his life. The local sheriff was a man named Vernon Cobb. His mother had been a Winfield. His grandmother had been a Winfield. He arrived at the site within an hour of the discovery, before the state police, and he arrived with instructions. The site was to be cleared immediately. The remains were to be transported to the county morgue. No photographs were to be taken. No press was to be notified. Dale Hutchins refused. He had already called Frankfurt. The state was already sending investigators. Sheriff Cobb stood at the edge of that excavation site for nearly 20 minutes, staring down at the circle of bones, and then he walked back to his cruiser and drove away. He resigned his position 3 days later and moved to Florida. He died of a heart attack in 1971. He was 42 years old. The coroner who examined the remains was Dr. Philip Marsh, a man with 30 years of experience and a reputation for thoroughness that bordered on obsession. He spent 6 days with those bodies. He documented every bone, every tooth, every fragment of cloth, and what he found should have been impossible. The remains had been buried at different times. That much was clear from the soil stratification and the rate of decomposition. But the manner of death was identical in every case. Each child had died from acute cardiac arrest. No disease, no trauma, no poison that he could detect. Their hearts had simply stopped, all at once, as though someone had reached into their chests and switched them off. Dr. Marsh wrote a 73-page report. He submitted it to the state medical examiner's office on November 18, 1966. The report was classified within 48 hours. Dr. Marsh was called to a meeting in Louisville. He returned to his office, boxed up his files, and tendered his resignation effective immediately. He never practiced medicine again. In a letter to his daughter, written 20 years later and discovered after his death, he wrote only this: "There are families in this country who have made agreements that predate the Constitution. I was shown proof. I was shown names. I was told that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. I chose to walk away. I suggest you do the same if you ever hear the name Winfield." The Winfield family in 1966 consisted of 47 living members spread across Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee. They had evolved with the times. No longer frontier physicians and land speculators, they were now attorneys, state legislators, university administrators, and hospital board directors. They owned radio stations and insurance companies. They funded scholarships and historical societies. They were, by all appearances, pillars of their communities, respected, admired, above suspicion. But the discovery of those 9 bodies threatened to unravel 2.5 centuries of carefully maintained silence. And so the family did what families like theirs have always done when their secrets claw their way to the surface. They applied pressure. They called in favors. They reminded certain people of certain obligations that had been inherited along with land titles and trust funds. Within 3 weeks of the discovery, the highway project was rerouted. The excavation site was filled in and paved over, becoming part of a rest stop parking lot that still exists today, 20 miles outside Ashford on Interstate 75. The 9 sets of remains were cremated by order of the State Health Department, cited as a public health precaution due to unidentified contamination in the soil. The cremation was carried out by a funeral home in Lexington owned by a man whose grandmother had been a Winfield. The ashes were never claimed. They were scattered in an unmarked location that no record identifies. Dale Hutchins, the foreman who had made the initial discovery, received a settlement from the State Highway Department in January of 1967. The amount was never disclosed, but Hutchins purchased a 200-acre farm in Indiana and retired at age 41. He gave one interview to a local newspaper in 1983, 16 years after the incident. When asked about what he had found that day in '66, he said only this: "I dug up something that should have stayed buried. Not the children. They deserved better. I mean the truth. Some families in this country have been around so long they've become part of the ground itself. You can't pull them up without pulling up everything around them. I took money to forget, but I never forgot. I see those little skulls every time I close my eyes, and I see the marks on their shoulders. Someone carved those marks into them after they died. Someone wanted them branded for whatever comes next." The reporter who conducted that interview tried to follow up, tried to dig deeper into the story. His editor killed the piece. The reporter quit 3 months later and moved to Oregon. The newspaper went bankrupt in 1987. The building that housed it was purchased by a development company. The company's largest investor was a trust controlled by the Winfield Family Foundation. The question that haunted Dr. Marsh, that drove Dale Hutchins to take money and disappear, that caused a sheriff to abandon his career and flee to another state, was not simply what had happened to those children. It was why. What kind of bargain requires the death of a child every 100 years? What kind of power is worth that price? And perhaps most disturbing of all, who or what was collecting? The answer lies in documents that were never meant to survive. In 1841, a clerk named Tobias Wren worked in the Harlan County Courthouse. He was responsible for copying land deeds and birth records into the official ledgers. Tobias was also a meticulous man, with an interest in genealogy and local history. He kept private notebooks where he tracked family lines, recorded odd patterns, noted discrepancies between official records and local gossip. These notebooks were discovered in 1998 in the basement of a demolished building in Harlan. They had been sealed in a tin box and hidden behind a false wall. In one entry from October of 1842, Tobias writes about a conversation he overheard between 2 elderly women at the general store. One of them was describing a memory from her childhood in the late 1700s. She spoke of a traveling preacher who had come through the county, a man who claimed he could read the future in a person's bloodline. He had stopped at the Winfield property and spent 3 days there. When he left, he was carrying a leather satchel that the woman swore had not been with him when he arrived. She remembered because her father, who worked as a hired hand for the Winfields, had helped load the preacher's wagon. Her father told her the satchel was heavy, far heavier than leather and paper should be, and it made a sound when it shifted. Not a rustle, a whisper. The preacher's name, according to Tobias Wren's notes, was Silas Corwin. No birth record exists for anyone by that name, no death record either. But the name appears in fragmentary references across multiple counties in Kentucky and Virginia between 1750 and 1820. Always described as a preacher, always traveling, always stopping at the homes of families who seemed to prosper after his visits, and always leaving with something he had not brought. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? In Samuel Winfield's journal, the one discovered in that traveling trunk, There is an entry from April of 1767 that describes a ritual his father performed on the night of the spring equinox. Samuel writes that Josiah gathered the entire family in a clearing on their property, a place where the trees grew in a circle and nothing would grow inside that circle, not even grass. Josiah stood at the center and spoke words Samuel did not recognize, words that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. Then Josiah cut his own palm and let the blood drip onto the barren ground. He said that the land had been given a taste of their bloodline, and every 100 years it would hunger again. And if they fed it, they would never know want, never know sickness, never know the weakness that brings all men low. After 1966, something fundamental changed within the Winfield family. The pattern that had sustained them for 243 years had been interrupted. The 9 children had been exhumed, cremated, scattered. The ritual site had been paved over. Whatever agreement Josiah Winfield had made in 1766 no longer held the same power, and the family began to decay from within. The first sign came in 1968. Marcus Winfield, a state representative and one of the family's most prominent members, suffered a stroke at age 52. He survived, but his left side remained paralyzed. His mind remained sharp enough to recognize what was happening. He withdrew from public life. In 1970, his wife left him. She filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, but in a deposition that was sealed by court order, she testified that Marcus had become obsessed with family genealogy. He spent hours poring over old documents, calculating dates, counting deaths. He had filled an entire room with papers covered in frantic handwriting. He kept saying the same thing over and over. "We owe 9 more. We owe 9 more. The account is not balanced." By 1975, 6 members of the Winfield family had died of various illnesses: cancer, heart disease, kidney failure, natural causes, by all medical standards. But for a family that had experienced almost no natural deaths in over 2 centuries, it was an apocalypse. The younger generation began to fracture. Some changed their names. Some moved to distant states and cut all contact. Some refused to have children, terrified of passing on whatever corruption ran through their blood. In 1982, a woman named Catherine Winfield Holbrook published a book under a pseudonym. The book was titled The Price of Prosperity: Hidden Costs in American Family Dynasties. It was marketed as historical fiction. It told the story of a fictional family called the Winterfields, who made a bargain with something ancient that lived in the land itself, something that predated European settlement, something that had its own understanding of debt and payment. The book sold poorly and went out of print within 2 years, but those who read it carefully notice that every date, every death, every detail matched the true history of the Winfield family, with only the names changed. Catherine Winfield Holbrook died in 1988. She was 53 years old. The death certificate listed pneumonia as the cause, but her neighbor, a retired nurse, would later tell investigators that Catherine had wasted away over the course of 6 months, losing weight and strength as though something was draining her from the inside. The neighbor said Catherine had told her, near the end, that she had broken a silence she should have kept, that there were agreements older than law, and breaking them came with consequences that did not care about good intentions. The Winfield family today exists in fragments. They still own property. They still hold positions of minor influence. But the dynasty that once seemed immortal has been reduced to something ordinary, something mortal. They age now. They sicken. They die. And every member of that family who remains knows exactly what they lost and exactly what they paid to have it in the first place. In 2003, a graduate student at the University of Kentucky named Jennifer Rollins was researching Appalachian folklore for her thesis. She had obtained access to the archives of the Kentucky Historical Society, and in a box of miscellaneous documents from Harlan County, she found something that should not have existed. It was a photocopy of a photocopy, degraded and barely legible, but unmistakable in its content. It was a page from Dr. Philip Marsh's original autopsy report from 1966, the page that detailed the birthmarks found on each of the 9 children. Jennifer Rollins made copies of the document and began to investigate. She tracked down Dale Hutchins' son in Indiana. She found a niece of Dr. Marsh in North Carolina. She even located the reporter who had interviewed Hutchins in 1983. She compiled everything into a draft thesis chapter titled The Winfield Phenomenon, Ritual Sacrifice, and Family Legacy in Rural Kentucky. Her faculty advisor read the chapter and called her into his office. He told her the chapter could not be included. He told her that certain families had legal resources that extended beyond what a graduate student could afford to fight. He told her to choose another topic. Jennifer Rollins refused. She submitted the full thesis in May of 2004. It was rejected by her committee, not for lack of scholarship, not for poor methodology, but for what they called unsubstantiated allegations against living individuals. Jennifer appealed. The appeal was denied. She left the university without her degree. The last known record of her is a social media post from 2009, where she mentioned she was still researching the Winfield family and had found new evidence. She has not posted since. Multiple attempts to locate her have been unsuccessful, but the documents she copied are still out there, circulating in small circles, passed between researchers and amateur historians who understand that some stories are actively suppressed, not because they are false, but because they are true. The rest stop on Interstate 75 still exists. Travelers stop there every day, unaware that they are standing on ground where 9 children were buried in a circle, their hearts stopped by something that expected payment and received it for over 200 years. The Winfield family has never issued a public statement about the events of 1966. They have never acknowledged the existence of the buried children. They have never explained why their family thrived with such unnatural consistency for so long, or why that consistency ended so abruptly. They simply continue to exist, diminished and mortal, carrying a history they cannot speak and a debt they can never fully repay. In 2019, the rest stop was scheduled for renovation. During preliminary excavation, workers reported finding fragments of what appeared to be very old bone, buried far deeper than the parking lot foundation. The work was halted for 3 days. A state archaeologist was called in. He examined the site, filed a report, and declared the fragments to be animal remains of no historical significance. The renovation continued. The parking lot was expanded. The earth was sealed once more. Some agreements, it seems, do not end simply because the payments stop. They linger in the soil. They wait in the bloodlines. They persist in the silence of families who know exactly what their ancestors did and understand that speaking that truth aloud would cost more than any of them are willing to pay. The Winfield children are gone. Their bones are ash. Their names are forgotten. But the mark on their shoulders, that crescent moon cradling 3 stars, still appears in the nightmares of those who saw it, and in the quiet moments. When the wind moves through the Kentucky hills, there are those who swear they can still hear children whispering beneath the ground, asking when the debt will finally be paid in full. The answer, of course, is never. Some prices are paid across generations, some bargains outlive the people who made them, and some families learn too late that immortality is not a gift, it is a loan. And the interest compounds in blood.